I think that Bitcoin is winning regardless of what you do or what I do or what anybody does. So I think you've got a very, very large group of voters in America that are all going to be pro-Bitcoin. No, I actually think the regulation is helping Bitcoin adoption. I think the regulation is accelerating Bitcoin adoption. It's rules without rulers. It's basically economic anarchy in the most virtuous sense.
So, Michael, I think this is your third Bitcoin interview in a row, and that's why I want to start things off with the question, in terms of health, rule number 4 in your 10 rules of life is to train your body. We want to know, what does the Michael Saylor workout routine look like?
If I can run outside, I run outside. If I can't run outside, then I'll run on a treadmill. And if I can't do that, sometimes I'll do a rowing machine. I like rowing machines or something similar. And then light weights. You know, different types of weights, pull-ups, push-ups, any kind of calisthenics.
Nice. Are you consistent with it?
Yeah, pretty consistent.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, then let's hop in. In the wake of the Binance and Coinbase lawsuits from the SEC, what do you think will happen to exchanges in America?
I think the exchanges are going to rationalize their crypto asset offerings down to just a handful of assets. I think there'll be a debate about whether it's Bitcoin only or Bitcoin and a couple of proof of work tokens. But I think they're going to focus on Bitcoin. Ultimately, they're going to realize that they should build their business around Bitcoin. And if you're going to be a crypto exchange, you're going to have to be an exchange that trades assets that are without an issuer. So that means they have to be ethically distributed or fairly distributed without an ICO, without a pre-mine, based on some proof of work, some consensus protocol, which is deemed by the regulators to be truly decentralized. And I think that all the tokens that are based on pre-mines and were supported by VC or ICOs, I think those are going to be discontinued. They're not going to be able to trade them on exchanges.
So you think America is going their clear way with regulation on cryptocurrencies? That it only leaves Bitcoin?
I think the direction in America is if you're in the crypto industry, you need to base it on Bitcoin.
Okay, nice. How do you think presidential candidates' views on Bitcoin will influence their probability of being elected?
I think that every presidential candidate is eventually going to endorse Bitcoin. We've already got Robert Kennedy on the Democratic side, and we've got Ron DeSantis on the Republican side endorsing Bitcoin. I think the support for Bitcoin amongst presidential candidates is unprecedented, and it's going to grow. There are many, many millions of voters. I think I ran a survey on my Twitter. Something like 86% of all Bitcoiners are single-issue voters. And so they're not going to vote for anybody that doesn't support Bitcoin. And I think that like 40 million people in the US are crypto adherents. So I think you've got a very, very large group of voters in America that are all going to be pro-Bitcoin. And most of them will require their candidates support Bitcoin in order to get their vote.
Do you think the US could lead a way on that topic also for like countries in Europe?
Yeah, I think that there's an orange wave spreading everywhere. Someone said that there are up to 400 million crypto advocates all around the world, and everyone that likes crypto likes Bitcoin. And the people that like Bitcoin are going to demand that their politicians support Bitcoin.
Yeah, because I think like in Europe we see politicians to tend more to being more restrictive with things like that. Like when I look at the situation in the US right now, I think they're like really open to the topic, but in Europe we are like still a little bit behind it, and we just like want to forbid everything we don't understand.
Well, I mean, the political controversy is around crypto tokens and cryptocurrencies like stable coins and then how you transfer them. But I don't actually see any controversy in the world over whether you can own Bitcoin. Like, for example, in the US, it's very clear you have the right to own digital property, and Bitcoin is digital property and a commodity. In Europe, you have the right to own property and you have the right to own Bitcoin. You know, even in China, they have banned cryptocurrency trading, but they have not banned cryptocurrency, or in this case, Bitcoin ownership.
And I think Hong Kong opens up again to it. So that,
yeah, so I'm hard. The only place I can think where there might be a ban on the ownership of Bitcoin might be North Korea or Cuba. Someplace where it is illegal to own property. You know, it's like it's illegal to own your own home, you see. You can't own a business, you can't own anything. You couldn't own a bar of gold, presumably, in those countries. So just a very few places in the world where there are no property rights. But in China, in Europe, in the US, in South America, even in Africa, you have property rights to own things. And so I think that the debate won't be over whether you can own Bitcoin. I think the debate will be over all the altcoins and the exchanges and currency controls and the like.
What do you think is the biggest threat for hyper-Bitcoinization? Is it regulation?
No, I actually think the regulation is helping Bitcoin adoption. I think the regulation is accelerating Bitcoin adoption because the 25,000 cryptos create a lot of confusion, and a lot of the money from cryptos, if you look at Sam Bankman-Fried, Sam was raising billions and billions of dollars and using it to manipulate politicians and celebrities and corporations against Bitcoin. So the fact that Sam is gone, FTX is gone, FTT is gone, and all the hundreds of millions of dollars that crypto exchange was using in order to create confusion and to undermine Bitcoin, who do you think spread the Bitcoin is environmentally unfriendly narrative? It was the guy supporting FTT token and proof of stake tokens, and how do you think they paid for it? Every academic, every politician, every journalist that ever actually thought about that, who do you think instigated that? That was actually the rest of the crypto industry. So the regulation is actually shutting down the parts of the industry that are dysfunctional to the progress of Bitcoin and even dysfunctional to the progress of the crypto revolution. So I think that what you're going to see is that the pretenders to Bitcoin, things that pretend to be decentralized that aren't, they're going to fall by the wayside. They're going to get regulated out. I think that all of the fact that that regulation is arriving gives a green light to governors, presidential candidates, Congress people, senators, and regulators to support Bitcoin. And that will cause people with hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars of assets to buy Bitcoin. So this is a necessary step along the road to the hyper-Bitcoin future.
But if it isn't regulation, what is the biggest threat to hyper-Bitcoinization?
I don't think there is a threat. I think that Bitcoin is winning regardless of what you do or what I do or what anybody does because of the law of thermodynamics. Right? It's like saying, what's the greatest threat to the universe continuing to move forward and the passage of time and entropy? It's like the sun's going to burn out, the universe is going to continue to move forward, the stars will continue to do their thing. We can't stop that. That's the law of thermodynamics. The reason that Bitcoin is going to win is because it's the most thermodynamically sound asset and the most thermodynamically sound network. It is the one that needs the least amount of energy, that it is the most robust to volatility. And whatever happens, whatever chaos ensues, it just makes Bitcoin that much more important and that much more successful, right? The chaos is undermining the competitors to Bitcoin. So ultimately, Bitcoin is going to continue to grow from 5 billion to 50 billion to 500 billion to 5 trillion to 50 trillion to 500 trillion. It's going to grow. The only thing that we can do is decide who wins and who loses. If you educate your friends and you educate your corporations and they adopt Bitcoin earlier, they'll benefit from it. And if you care about your country or your family, then you teach them about Bitcoin and they'll be early beneficiaries. There's going to be people that are early to the revolution. There are going to be people that are late to the revolution. But it'll happen. And I don't really see any obvious threat to it. All I see is just milestones, right, along the way.
And I think that's what we're already seeing right now, because that's why the movement is always growing. That's why we have conferences like these. So your firm has invested heavily in Lightning Network infrastructure. Do you see any other layer 2 protocols competing with Lightning over the long term?
Yeah, I think that there will be competition. I think that Bitcoin is an open permissionless network. So anybody can create their own layer 2, well, they can create their own Bitcoin application. And if that application is proprietary, let's say Cash App moving Bitcoin cash tag to cash tag, that would be proprietary. I call that a layer 3 application. And if that application is open and permissionless, open source, and given away to the world, like Lightning, I call that a layer 2 application. And anybody can create any layer 2 application they want. Anybody can create a layer 3 application. As it turns out, Cash Tag or Cash App uses the layer 1. It allows you to move Bitcoin on the base layer. It allows you to use layer 2, Lightning. And it also allows you to move Bitcoin on layer 3, Cash Tag to Cash Tag. They're an example of all 3 layers. There's competition. There's always going to be competition. So people think of Lightning as for payments right now. But you could actually create libraries that support DeFi trading or other assets. And some people may decide they hate that, and they may fork Lightning. And you could fork that and say, this is Thunder, and this is going to have 10 features, and Lightning will only have 5 features. And the market will decide whether to adopt Thunder or adopt Lightning. And there will be like wars, just like the block size wars. And I think there are a lot of people that have interesting ideas. Like maybe you want to burn a document into the Bitcoin base layer. Maybe you want to burn a hash of a document into the Bitcoin base layer. Maybe you want to create an orange check, which is a public-private key pair, burn in the base layer. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to create an NFT on the base layer. Maybe people hate that idea. Maybe you want to create Lightning channels, and maybe someone says, you know, they want to do something like Fedimints to get more complicated, and then people will introduce new smart contract protocols, or maybe they'll introduce other types of registration protocols or asset trading protocols.
I think the important one is that it doesn't affect the layer 1, right? That's the key essence of it.
I think the most important thing is you protect the integrity of layer 1. Protect Bitcoin. I think it's okay. It's okay to create new ideas. It's okay to criticize them. Like maybe you think it's stupid. And if you think ordinals are not an intelligent thing, so you criticize it. And if you're right, then no one will use it. Okay? And if it turns out that, you know, maybe one day a bank wants to issue letters of credit and they want to burn them on the Bitcoin base layer, and each one is worth $1 billion. They'll be doing billion-dollar transactions on the Bitcoin base layer. And if they think that's a good idea, and if the world thinks that's a good idea, that will help us move toward hyperbitcoinization. And if it's a stupid idea, they'll fail, it won't work, and then they'll stop it. So I tend to be of the view that with regard to layer 1, you can create, you can criticize, but don't censor. With regard to, and be very conservative. Like if you think you know that that's a bad idea, well, do you know that in 100 years, 8 billion people doing 100 million things won't make it a good idea? Can you tell me for sure that in 100 years, 8 billion people won't come up with a good idea that you haven't thought of? So the free market is, we just let billions of people do millions of things, and if they're stupid, they'll fail. But someone may invent a good idea that you didn't think of. They'll succeed. I tend to think that if you want to experiment with the protocol, you should do it on the layer 2. Like if you want to do smart contracts and super fast payments and take a risk, well, you risk the money in the channel. You can risk the money in the layer 2 channel. Don't risk the entire Bitcoin network, right? Because you're risking the future of the human race. So don't put all of humanity and human civilization and put the entire Bitcoin network at risk. You come up with your idea. If it's a good idea, it will spread on the layer 2. And then it won't need to be on layer 1, right? And if there's an overwhelming consensus and everybody agrees that it's a good idea, then maybe Bitcoin will evolve. But if it's a controversial idea and you want to make it open source, you do it layer 2. And if it's a controversial idea, but you don't want to make it open source, build a Bitcoin app like Cash App or Coinbase or Binance or whatever. MicroStrategy is a Bitcoin idea. We decided to take a public company. We bought Bitcoin and we sell a security. It's not a layer 2 idea. It's not a layer 1 idea. It's a layer 3 idea. And if we're right, our shareholders will make a lot of money. They've made billions of dollars. And if we're wrong, our shareholders will lose money, but the Bitcoin network is not threatened. So that's the beauty of Bitcoin. Bitcoin allows hundreds of millions of companies and billions of people to all engage in the way that they want. And there's no one right answer, but Austrian economics and basic theory suggest that if you allow everybody on the planet to innovate in a rational way as fast as they can and take responsibility for their own risks and suffer the consequences and reap the benefits, then the economy will grow at the fastest rate. That is the cornerstone of Austrian economics. And Bitcoin is really the world's greatest experiment, or the greatest practical implementation of Austrian economics, because it's a totally sound money. Anybody can access the economy. It's rules without rulers. It's basically economic anarchy in the most virtuous sense. And if you own a Bitcoin and you put in cold storage for 30 years, it's quite possible that 1 million people will run 100,000 experiments somewhere in the world you've never heard of, and 99.9% of them will fail, and 100 of them will succeed, and Bitcoin will go up by a factor of 1,000, and you will get rich by not having meddled in anything they did. You will accept none of their losses, you will get all of their benefits, and they will be happy to give you their benefits, and you just stay out of the way. And everybody in the network all benefits from all of the risk-taking and all of the genius of everybody else. Your only job is keep the Bitcoin, hodl, and don't F with the network. Don't corrupt the network, keep your Bitcoin, and let the world function. That is the most thermodynamically sound, most rational way in order to create the greatest economy the human race has ever seen.
Yeah, let's hope Bitcoin stays the same in the future. Up until now, Lightning was a place for startups and small projects rather than large enterprises. Do you think this will change as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of enterprises and corporations that are going to enter Lightning.
Yeah.
You know, we're working to bring our Lightning application GA, and we're going to sell it to thousands of our customers. I think that companies like Cash App, or Block and Cash App, they've introduced Lightning as a protocol, and they've got 50 million plus users, and that's legitimizing. I think we've seen even the crypto exchanges like Coinbase and Binance have announced they're going to support Lightning. So I think that Lightning is kind of essential, and it's going to spread, you know, like wildfire throughout the entire economy, both in the crypto economy and in the mainstream economy, because it represents money over IP.
Yeah. Your career has been defined by being able to forecast trends and peer into the future. How did you cultivate the skill, and how can others do the same?
I was fortunate enough to have a good engineering education at MIT. And when I went to MIT, I studied in the School of Aerospace Engineering, and that was the greatest aerospace engineering school in the world. And aerospace engineering is the quintessential systems engineering discipline. In order to create a spaceship or a plane that flies, you have to master software, electrical engineering, you have to master civil engineering, elements of ocean engineering, elements of mechanical engineering, thermodynamics and propulsion, aerodynamics. You know, pretty much all the aspects of engineering go into an airplane. If, you know, when you're in that airplane 5 miles up, if the pressure blows out, you're going to freeze to death, you're going to suffocate, the plane could go into tailspin, you can burn up, right? You're moving near the speed of sound, the electronics can fail. There are all these complicated problems. And you have to solve all of them. If you don't solve one of them, the plane won't fly. So aerospace engineering, it teaches you to appreciate systems. Among other things, servo mechanisms, cybernetic mechanisms. Airplanes are designed to be stable. The wings like this, when the plane does this, it generates more lift on this wing, which brings it back to level. Turns this way, it generates more lift. So airplanes are stable mechanisms, and avionics have servo mechanisms and cybernetics built into them. Otherwise, you could never fly the airplane. You'd have to master control theory. So I had that engineering background, and the other thing I studied at MIT was the history of science. And MIT also had one of the world's great history of science programs. And so I studied how different types of science and paradigm shifts get introduced. What happens when we introduce the railroads and internal combustion engine and X-rays and antibiotics, right? How did we master infectious disease and fire, electricity? And how did politicians react? And how did corporations prosper? So those are my two passions. And when I left MIT, having studied all those, I then went into business, and so I had 30 years running a software company, and I think that taught me a lot about creating things. So I created products. I created probably a dozen different companies. Alarm.com is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company, and I invented that. That was home automation. And then, of course, I took MicroStrategy public. And then I created a product for interactive voice response, you know, called Angel. That was before Siri and before Alexa. And I created all sorts of analytic products, Wisdom.com, Emma.com, Usher.com. Some of them succeeded, some of them failed, you know. And I got to see what it's like to create things. And I also learned humility. I learned that sometimes the things that I thought that were most brilliant, beautiful, they were too complicated. And they crashed. And I was in love with them, but they were too complicated for the world. So I realized that for somebody to be successful, it has to be this very interesting combination of being not too complicated, very robust, has to provide a universal benefit. It needed to offer utilitarian value. It needed to be well engineered. And good engineering isn't always the most beautiful thing, like it with boats or ships. And I know a lot about yachts. The most beautiful one isn't the most seaworthy one. The beautiful ones look good in port, but when you're in a storm, they sink and they wash up onto the rocks, and they're dangerous and scary. Or you fall and you break your leg on them. The ones you want are the ones that don't necessarily look beautiful in port, but in the middle of a storm, they're very seaworthy, and they save your life, and they get you from point A to point B. So when I arrived at Bitcoin, I understood the engineering principles, and Bitcoin is this great cybernetic network. That it is a perfect network composed of imperfect parts. You know, the last time we did that, a very famous example is the discovery of longitude on the ocean. a guy by the name of John Harrison created a solution to finding longitude, and people had failed to do this for thousands of years. And he defeated every mathematician of his day. The way he figured out how to determine your longitude on the ocean was creating a perfect clock. And he created a perfect clock with Greenwich Mean Time, which is the Royal Observatory time, and every ship had that clock and another clock. And when they sailed around the ocean, they would keep one clock set to Greenwich Mean Time, the other clock set to high noon, subtract the hours of one to the other, multiply it by 15 degrees, and you get the longitude. And so, why was that important? The entire British Navy used it to dominate the seas. How did they create the clock? The clock was a perfect machine, and the problem was, it was a perfect machine made of imperfect instruments. All the metals that were used at the time expanded and contracted with humidity and temperature. And so they could never get the mechanism of the clock to keep perfect time until Harrison came along and he invented an element that is now in every modern thermostat. And the element had overlapping laminates such that you would have an imperfect metal pulling this way, and the same metal aligned to pull the opposite way. And when you have two imperfect metals that keep distorting, if you can distort them against each other, you get no distortion. A servo mechanism. So the history of science is full of people solving the problem of how you get precision with imperfect materials, and that clock gave us longitude, gave us navigation. All through engineering, you have servo mechanisms like that, perfect instruments made of imperfect materials with imperfect engineering, run by imperfect human beings. And what is the greatest of the perfect machines with imperfect materials run by imperfect humans? It's Bitcoin. Bitcoin became that great cybernetic mechanism. And when I saw the way that Satoshi had combined proof of work and ASICs and mining and all the incentives in order to create this stable system with the difficulty adjustment that kept coming back to one block every 10 minutes, regardless of whether you have millions or billions of dollars worth of equipment, regardless of whether you have 7th generation ASICs or CPU. When I saw that, I said, this is just a brilliant engineering achievement, and it's not the most beautiful thing.
It isn't?
Well, it is. It's beautiful if you're an engineer, but it's not beautiful to the altcoiners.
Yeah.
Right? It's not beautiful to the crypto bros. They wanted something which didn't use electricity. They wanted something that didn't use an ASIC. They wanted something, right, that didn't actually have all of the competition. They wanted something that ran faster, that was cheaper, right? Like the rest of the crypto community wants it to run in 1 second for no fee with no electricity. And they want it to be ASIC resistant. Okay? What you realize when you look at the 1,000-foot long super tanker that hauls all that oil, that's 60 feet wide and has that sweeping hull, is it's not a luxury yacht, but it actually moves at 28 knots, 8,000 miles, and can outrun hurricanes, and it works. You want that thing. You don't want the pretty speedboat, you know? You're not going to make it to your destination. You're going to die along the way and capsize. So, back to your question, right? What did I have? I had an engineering background. I had a history of science background. I had a history in business that was both, it gave me the success enough to be able to come up with money to buy Bitcoin, a publicly traded company with cash, but enough humility to realize that sometimes you can be too smart for your own good, and you think that you can design the perfect thing. And in fact, the perfect thing is right in front of you. And when you see a good thing, you have to focus on it, because most entrepreneurs fail because they have one success and they immediately go on to the next thing. and the next thing. And they end up not making the first thing work, but rather they go after the fourth thing, and by the time they're chasing after the fifth good idea, the first thing fails. And so I think appreciation of engineering, appreciation of history, with an appreciation of just how hard it is to be successful in the real world. Those three things, I think, helped me to appreciate the opportunity that was Bitcoin when I finally came across it. Terra, Luna, FTT, a lot of smart guys wanted to trade altcoins, and they made some money for a time, but they're juggling razor blades. You have to rethink accounting, rethink economics, rethink money, rethink finance, and therefore rethink political history after you get orange pilled.